Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Now, the hot and sunny bank holiday has seen people out and about enjoying their freedom. But how worried should we be about any potential third wave of coronavirus? And is fully unlocking in June the best plan amid warnings that it may not be? We'll ask Government Minister Paul Scully, who's on the programme shortly. Plus,
I'm there, mate.
we'll be joined by the actor and renowned hardman Ross Kemp, who's showing his softer side to celebrate volunteers who shone during the pandemic. Plus, as Japan prepares to start vaccinating its Olympic athletes, we'll talk to Mo Farah about his hopes and fears for Tokyo. It's Tuesday, the 1st of June. New hope for families. The baby who's become the first patient in England to get a potentially life-saving drug with a £1.8 million a dose price tag on the NHS. Charged, the daughter-in-law of Tory grandee Lord Ashcroft to appear in court over the shooting of a police officer on a Caribbean island. What next? After a bank holiday in the sun, how worried is the government about a third wave? And will ministers put the brakes on a June unlocking? A neighbourhood under siege. Sky News investigates as residents say they're living in fear because of a housing scheme for troubled tenants.
Some of them have got mental health, some of them are alcoholics. There was a guy recently who took an overdose and died in the house upstairs as well.
Tennis controversy. The world's highest paid sportswoman withdraws from the French Open after being fined for missing news conferences following mental health concerns. A very good morning to you. It's thought to be the world's most expensive drug. Now, in a first, a 5-month-old baby in England has been given a potentially life-saving treatment on the NHS, which has a price tag of £1.79 million per dose. The gene therapy has given new hope to families whose children have this particular spinal condition. Let's talk to Aisha Zahid, who's in the newsroom for us. What can you tell us, Aisha?
Well, as you said, we know that 5-month-old Arthur Morgan is the first NHS patient to receive this drug therapy. He received it last week, 3 weeks after initially receiving his diagnosis. And his father said he broke down after hearing that Arthur would be given the treatment because it is a devastating condition. Spinal muscular atrophy is a rare genetic condition. According to scientific data, it affects around 10,000 babies worldwide, and it includes symptoms including progressive muscle weakness, loss of movement, making it difficult for babies to start sitting up, start crawling around, also difficulty breathing, and it's a condition that shortens life expectancy to 2 years. So it's a really important, potentially life-saving drug. One expert told Sky News how it works.
Injected into the body and can get into the cells in the body, including the motor nerves. And the motor nerves can then make the protein, or the protein can be made in the motor nerves, the SMN protein. And that can prevent the motor nerves from degenerating and dying.
Up until 2 years ago, there was no treatment for this condition in particular. So it's going to be really great news for families affected and hopefully provide a lifeline to baby Arthur and many other children too.
OK, Aisha, thank you. The daughter-in-law of Conservative grandee Lord Ashcroft has been charged with manslaughter by negligence after a police superintendent was shot dead in Belize. Jasmine Hartin was being held following the discovery of the body of Henry Gemmett on the dock in San Pedro on Friday. Her lawyer told media outside the court she'd been denied bail and will be remanded in prison. Detectives had previously said a single gunshot was heard and the gun involved belonged to Mr Gemmett. Ms Hartin is partner of Andrew Ashcroft, son of Michael Ashcroft, former deputy chairman and major financial backer of the Conservative Party. Now, the government's under increasing pressure to announce a delay in lifting more COVID restrictions later this month. Some scientists are warning of a third wave of COVID, with the India variant of the virus spreading across the country. So these are the key developments this morning, and there are changes to some travel arrangements. Malta reopens today to fully vaccinated British tourists. Flights will resume tomorrow from Moscow to London, and Heathrow Terminal 3 is reopening just to handle arrivals from the red list countries. The variants are being renamed. Under a new WHO system, the Kent or UK variant is going to be called Alpha, the South African variant Beta, the Brazil variant Gamma, and the India variant will be called Delta. More than 100 MPs and peers, meanwhile, are urging Boris Johnson to promise that for every vaccine bought by the UK, we should also donate a dose to lower-income countries. Let's talk to Small Business Minister Paul Scully, who joins us now. Good to see you this morning. Look, how concerned is government about this third wave?
Well, I think we've got to be absolutely on our game, making sure that we're looking at the data and carefully working it through. Every day gives us richer data, but we're still encouraging everybody to make sure they get their jab, and especially those people who have already had their first vaccination to go and get their second one. That's why we've accelerated progress on that, and we're still rolling out the vaccination programme at speed.
I mean, Professor Gupta, Ravi Gupta, on one interview yesterday said the UK is already at the beginning of a third wave of infections, and at least 3/4 of cases with a variant identified in India. That's got to set off some real alarm bells, hasn't it?
We're taking careful view on where those any increase in infections with the Indian variant are happening, and that's why we're looking at surge testing in those areas and really making sure we're getting on the front foot. But by accelerating the vaccination programme, making people get those second jabs, at the moment, you look, all the tests are talking about the 4 tests that we have are looking at the number of cases, but also hospitalisations, and those vaccinations can help us break that cycle of people having to go to hospital if they get COVID, and that's what's going to keep us on the roadmap.
Yeah, but 3,383 new cases reported in the latest 24-hour period. Now, when you look at that figure being just 2,000 just a week or two ago, I mean, the experts say, the scientists say that, this shows that these figures are now rising exponentially.
If you bring people together in any setting, then there is more chance of people catching COVID. And so that's why we are still making sure we remind people that the virus is still here, that they still need to adhere to putting their masks on, socially distancing, having good ventilation. But again, if that jab is, they get asked to have their jab, go and have it, because that's the only way we can actually get past this, beat the virus, and get back to a sense of normality. Because we've got to get out of economy.
Forgive me. A lot of people would absolutely agree with that, but that's all going to go to pot come June the 21st, unless the government says we're going to delay this by a few weeks.
No, what we're doing, we're looking at the data, we're making sure that we can use the latest information rather than speculating now. We've set the timetable that we'll make a decision in a couple of weeks' time. We've only got to wait a couple of weeks that we can make the decision based on that last data rather than speculation.
Yeah, but you do acknowledge, do you, that there is at least the potential of a third wave coming?
There's the potential of an increase in of the virus of transmission, and that's what we've got to be absolutely alive to, and that's why we're encouraging people to get their vaccination, encouraging people to remind them to use masks, to use social distancing, and to have fresh air if they're in an indoor setting as well, to help each other. But of course, we're looking at the data really, really carefully.
Look, our chief political correspondent last night cited government sources telling him, saying that the June 21st date of complete unlocking, government sources saying that's 50-50 now. Do you agree with those sort of figures?
There's just the problem with speculation is this affects people's lives, it affects people's business as well, because we want to make sure that we can protect jobs, protect businesses. That's why we've increased the amount that's going to apprentices, for companies to take on apprentices, to £3,000 for each apprentice they take. But this is all part of the economy, making sure that we're not making any decisions through newspapers, through speculations, because that's what companies need certainty, businesses need certainty. Well, of course, people are going about their daily life. need that certainty as well.
They absolutely. I mean, we talk to businesses, big and small, on this programme all the time. They absolutely want certainty, and of course they want to reopen on June 21st fully, particularly the sort of entertainment and retail sectors. But the problem is they'd be better off having some certainty now, wouldn't they, when a lot of scientists, well-respected scientists that the government says it's listening to, are saying, we've got to push this back now. The businesses would benefit from having a little bit more notice, wouldn't they?
Absolutely they would, and we're trying to give them as much notice as possible, but we're also trying to look at the very latest data. And yes, there has been an increase in people with the virus, but as I say, we're looking at what happens to hospitalisations, and the effects, of course, on from the vaccination on the variants, to see how effective the vaccination is.
I mean, you talk about the importance at this stage being getting more and more people vaccinated. The problem is it's very difficult to do logistically, isn't it? I mean, there are plenty of people, and I personally know some, who've been trying to get their vaccine, cannot get appointments, or the appointments are cancelled, or they don't have the right jab available for their age group. They just can't get the vaccination at the moment.
Well, we're on target to make sure that all adults can be offered a vaccine by the end of July, and so that's going great guns. There will always be issues when you're trying to give vaccinations. We've had 62 jabs so far, 62 million jabs so far. So clearly, we've got to make sure that we can keep it as organised as possible. We had some great stories coming back just yesterday. The 11,000 people that were jabbed in Twickenham, younger people, they were saying about how they were moving through the queues really carefully. There will always be situations, though, and I'd advise people to make sure that go back to the website to look at when the next appointment is due, that they can take up their jab.
Look, I don't want to sound overly critical because, I mean, this is a nightmare for everyone involved, and logistically, of course, it's all a complete nightmare. But I just want you do sound a little bit, forgive me for saying so, you sound a little bit like you're fudging this whole issue over June 21st. I know the Prime Minister won't have told you exactly what he's going to do, but why can't we just get a straight answer saying, you know, perhaps from you saying, you know, there is talk of this third wave, we are really worried, and this is all has to be, you know, the June 21st at least has a very real possibility of being put on hold. Why can't we hear that?
This isn't fudge. What we've said, we'll look at the data, we'll make a decision by the 14th of June as to what's happening on the 21st. And clearly, we know the fact that case numbers are going up. We do want to make sure that we'll only open up based on data, not those dates, as I say. And so we'll use the latest information. So this isn't fudge. This is making sure that we just don't speculate, that we use the latest information and the most accurate information to make a really, really important decision.
We know there's reports that 100 MPs and peers are calling for the Prime Minister to look at the global issue of vaccination as well more clearly, and for every vaccine dose we bring into the country, we should be sending one out or paying for one to be sent out to those poorer countries. I mean, in one hand, it's difficult when we haven't got everyone vaccinated here, but actually we are going to face a huge problem, aren't we, unless we get the whole globe sorted out here pretty quickly.
Yeah, very much so. You know, we won't be out of this until we can get everyone vaccinated, and that's why the UK was one of the earliest donors to COVAX, setting up COVAX, £500 million there, which has vaccinated people in 92 different countries around the world. But it's really important that we make sure that we can keep progress, not just in the UK, but across the world.
Yeah, I mean, what is the Prime Minister going to do about this? Is he going to be pushing for this very heavily at the G7 meeting?
Well, the G7 is a really important time for people to come together and look at what we do across the world. The UK is one of the biggest donors to Gavi, the vaccination body across the world, and we'll always work together internationally to make sure that we can get on top of the pandemic through vaccinations.
Can I just ask you about the Olympics? You know, not long till they're going now. I mean, the Tokyo have started vaccinating their Olympic athletes, whereas the rollout in the country as a whole has been really, really poor. Only about 12 million out of 120 million people have had any sort of vaccination at all. 62%, I think the figure is, of locals there say they don't want the Olympics to go ahead. What should we do?
Well, again, we'll use the data. The decision will be taken. That's not my decision, so I haven't been part of that discussion. But clearly, we'll make sure that we monitor and see what's going on before we send people over there.
Yeah, well, it's not a case of what's going on in Japan, though, is it? I mean, their figures are quite good. They're concerned about it all being brought in and imported into the country. Don't we have a responsibility to say, perhaps, well, we're not going to put you at risk. We'll stay at home.
Well, again, those discussions will be taking place. It's not a discussion I'm having and I'm part of, but I'm sure those discussions are taking place.
OK, Minister, good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, let's have a look at those latest figures for you. And there were 3,383 new cases in the last 24 hours. Just one more death. That's only the second time since last July the number has dropped that low. 40 million people have had their first dose of a COVID vaccine. Well, still to come for you this morning, just after 8 o'clock, we'll speak to the head of nighttime industries about what a delay to unlocking could mean for clubs and nightclubs. At 9:20, we'll talk to Ross Kemp, who's swapping the more hostile environments for one hopefully more hospitable in aid of pandemic volunteers. And as Japan prepares to host the delayed Olympic Games, I'll talk to four-time Olympic champion Sir Mo Farah, who hopes to add to his medal collection. That's at 9:30. Now, a Sky News investigation has uncovered evidence that a type of housing supposed to help some of the most vulnerable in society could be putting them and others at risk. Providers of exempt accommodation can charge local authorities inflated rents in exchange for housing ex-offenders, drug addicts and others from troubled backgrounds. But as our home editor Jason Farrell reports from Birmingham, it's led to at least one neighbourhood feeling like it's under siege.
Violence, vandalism, addiction, a leafy suburb turned into a junk-strewn nightmare, a Birmingham neighbourhood which claims it's under siege.
You name it, we've seen it. We've had people, cars attacked on the road. Just on this stretch here, there was 7 vehicles in one night. Right. Wing mirrors of cars being attacked, the hypodermic needles in the tyres.
The problem here, and in other cities, is family homes being turned into what's called exempt accommodation, which house high densities of troubled tenants. Providers charge the council inflated rates and are supposed to provide the tenants additional support, but we've found the system's flawed.
Majority of them are drug addicts. Some of them have got mental health. Some of them are alcoholics. There was a guy recently who took an overdose and died in the house upstairs as well. So there is quite a lot going on here.
Emma lives in an exempt property which she currently has to herself, but recently shared. Emma sent this video to her landlord complaining her flatmates were taking crack cocaine in the communal area.
This ain't a crack house, and he said that none of yous are smoking it.
She says the man in this video died 3 weeks later, and the requisite support was lacking.
I kept complaining. I said it's not right. I said what they're doing isn't right. And then about 3 weeks later, that's when the guy upstairs got found dead. And I turned around and I said to the staff here, I said, I told you.
Providers, Ox Hill House, say they did offer support and the resident died of a lung condition. But a Sky News investigation has found a systemic problem. With other providers, there are reports of domestic violence victims being placed with men who have a history of violence. This man, Spencer Hobson, was not risk assessed by his provider in Northampton before he stabbed his flatmate to death. There was a similar case in Birmingham last year.
Was these people either they'd come from prison, they have drug habits, all sorts of the unsociable sort of people that you don't want here and so on. And it's also become very difficult because a lot of families still got children here. And often, walking down the streets, you'll see condoms, you'll see needles, you'll see all sorts of things.
And oversupply of exempt homes means families are getting stuck in temporary properties. The mother of 2 toddlers living here for a year didn't want to appear on camera.
So you can see the mold on the door. And all the clothes are smelling as well.
Windows are broken. It's damp and infested.
Mouse is in the drawer.
Oh God, yeah.
Can you see there? There's mouses around, there's cockroaches around, because I'm storing everything in these containers, which are easy for me now.
The transient, often overpopulated houses turn streets into dumping grounds. In Birmingham, exempt accommodation has doubled in 18 months. And the council says they can't stop landlords, some linked to organised crime, from funneling problems into their communities.
So we know that there's a lot of providers and organisations that are directly going to places like probation services or prisons or other places like that.
Outside of Birmingham?
Outside of the city, and asking them, you know, we've got properties, do you want to actually let through us? And these are providers that we wouldn't necessarily put people in ourselves as the local authority.
So you can understand why some people on some streets say it feels like we're living in an open prison.
Absolutely, and we've got absolute empathy for them.
Birmingham and other councils want greater powers to contain the problem. The Ministry of Housing told Sky News we're currently running extended pilots in 5 areas, backed by £5.4 million, trialling new approaches to crack down on the small number of landlords who provide inadequate support to vulnerable people living in supported housing. The housing regulator says it's monitoring non-compliance in this sector, but many say the system is simply a mess and needs urgently changing. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Naomi Osaka has withdrawn from the French Open. The world number 2 won her opening match on Sunday, but said she didn't want to do news conferences at Roland Garros to protect her mental health. Announcing her withdrawal on social media, the Japanese player said she'd suffered long bouts of depression since winning her first Grand Slam title in 2018, and she's had support from other players.
I feel for Naomi. I feel like I wish I could give her a hug because I know what it's like. Like I said, I've been in those positions. Everyone is different and everyone handles things differently. So, you know, you just have to let her handle it the way she wants to in the best way that she thinks she can.
A 14-year-old boy has been stabbed to death in Birmingham. It's thought it took place on College Road in King's Standing, with officers searching for up to 7 attackers who later ran towards Chester Road. The force says the area has been flooded with officers and that CCTV inquiries are being fast-tracked. A vigil has been held for a man who was stabbed to death outside his flower stall in Islington. Tony Eastlake is said to have worked the stall for almost 40 years and has been described as a very special man. Police are asking for anyone with information or dash cam footage to come forward and help with inquiries.
Come on. It's all right.
A little girl has been rescued by a lifeboat crew after drifting out to sea on a dinghy. A 999 call was made to the Coast Guards in the village of Conway County Borough in North East Wales. A volunteer crew scrambled and located the child, thankfully. She was very clearly frightened but unhurt. And they are all volunteers in the RNLI. They do an amazing job. Now, there are growing calls for more climate change topics to be taught in schools. Many young people want to know more about the planet and environmental issues, and some teachers say the current curriculum is limiting. Laura Bundock went to a primary school in Bristol that dedicates 6 days a year to teaching its students more about changes to the environment.
The expansion of Bristol Airport has been rejected. Planners have decided not to expand it.
You won't find this kind of debate in every school, but Cotton Gardens Primary in Bristol is different. They devote 6 whole days a year to teaching climate change.
This is a serious issue that's going to really impact on the future generations.
You need to learn about it because it's our planet that we live on, so you need to think more carefully and take more serious actions about it.
Sometimes I do worry about if this planet's going to be affected and how much longer we've got until it really starts getting really worse and terrible.
Maybe they can't drive or maybe they don't have a car.
These lessons aren't mandatory, but teacher Sam Williams says they should be.
You can have these conversations in a safe, in an age-appropriate way, and you can give the children the knowledge to empower them to understand about climate change and then feel confident to take positive action.
They're taking action and making their mark in Birmingham. These older students are part of Teach the Future, a campaign calling for more climate change in the curriculum.
Really, it should be weaved into every single subject, because whether you're a builder or a banker, a farmer or a pharmacist, you're going to be impacted by the climate crisis. So we should have the education needed to build a resilient society that has these knowledge, skills, resources.
They've taken their campaign to the heart of government. The message: more climate education.
They don't tell you about the socio-economic consequences of it. And that just leaves us in ignorance about the actual practical problems of climate change and the solutions that we need to solve them.
I definitely feel like a lot of the young generation feel that the people in power at the minute are really letting them down.
Some students say not knowing enough is creating eco-anxiety. In a statement, the Department for Education told us it is vital that young people are taught about climate change, which is why relevant topics are included in a national curriculum for both primary and secondary schools. Teachers have the freedom to expand on these areas if they wish to do so.
What you'll need to do is you need to make a whole...
But many feel the curriculum could and should go further to help nurture future generations and teach them how best to cope with the climate crisis. Laura Bundock, Sky News, Birmingham.
Now, when the sun came out, people certainly got out and about and made the most of it. Sunseekers headed to seaside resorts all over the country. Blackpool, as you can see, was particularly popular. There's the fabulous tower. Best place to be. Brighton on the south coast with the pier and beaches were packed, so people do look quite socially distanced, which is good. It's got to be done, got to keep your distance, got to stay sensible in all of this. But how nice to get out and about in that weather, or just sit in your garden and enjoy it if you've got one. Of course, the big question is that weather here to stay? Joe, please say yes.
Well, which bit are you talking about, the heat or the sunshine?
Oh,
you can have one without the other.
Oh, I think the sunshine, because it cheers us up a bit more, doesn't it?
OK, all right. Well, I might be able to organise that. As always, when we have very high temperatures, we do see a thundery breakdown, and that is on its way. Yesterday, 25.1. Today, 27 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow we could see 28 or 29. So we do need things to cool down, but we've also got high pressure building in at the weekend. So a return to calm, settled conditions with some sunshine. Let's take a look at today's forecast.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
So we're currently dominated by high pressure, but that's really over Scandinavia and it's moving its way eastwards, and that's allowing this cloud and patchy rain to work its way into western parts of Ireland. It's not actually getting very far. It's going to hover backwards and forwards through the course of the day. So as we've seen in recent days, any low cloud, mist and fog will burn off very quickly today. Lots more sunshine to come, and it's still warm sunshine. Temperatures up to around 26, maybe even 27 degrees Celsius, certainly mid-20s for many. It will feel a little bit cooler on these eastern coasts, not because of the cloud this time, but because we've got an onshore flow. And then a very nice end to the day. It stays mild overnight and also fine. It's tomorrow morning that we start to see these heavy thundery showers making their way into parts of the southwest Wales and also the Republic of Ireland. Torrential downpours, thunder, lightning pushing their way northwards through the course of the day. But ahead of that, still warm and sunny once again.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Joe, thank you. Still to come on Sky News Breakfast. More on the coronavirus situation in Japan as the country gears up for the Olympics with a new vaccination programme.
And yeah, so my legs are basically just really tight, and it also affects my right hand as well. So I have to walk on crutches everywhere, but most of the time I'm in a wheelchair. So when I was 6 years old, I had an unbelievable operation in the United States, which reduced the spasticity in my muscles, and it has completely changed my life. And I just really want to give that opportunity to somebody else.
I think David set out to do this 2 years ago when he wanted to join in with the rest of us doing a cross-country course. And when we heard him say it 2 years ago, we were like, okay, this is going to take a lot of preparation. But he's definitely prepared. Last year, sadly, it was cancelled due to COVID, but yeah, when we get over that 5 kilometre mark, it will be. He's already inspirational, but he's going to be even more inspirational. He's a living legend.
All the compliments he's given to me, I'm going to give straight back to him. One of the kindest guys I've ever met, and just so loyal. Anytime I've needed him to help me or do ridiculous stuff for me that nobody else would do, he's been there. In the pouring rain at 10:30 at night when we can't see where we're going, he's there. When we've fallen over at the top of the hill and rolled down, he's got me straight back up again. So yeah, he is just the most unbelievable bloke.
I think there's a stigma that surrounds disability, and I think what David's doing is he's proving that stigma wrong. Like you said, it's not a nice phrase for a relationship for able-bodied and disabled. And I think what David's doing is proving that disability has no limits. Just because you are physically disabled doesn't mean that mentally, and doesn't mean that you can't join in with what other people can do and what he looked at this as a challenge, but he's made it. He looked at it as it was impossible, but it's now a possibility, and he's gonna destroy it later.
Hopefully.
Now, the Small Business Minister has told this programme the government is accelerating the vaccination programme because that will help to keep the roadmap of lifting lockdown in place. Paul Scully was speaking as a number of experts warned a third wave of country could hit the country, with some urging the government to delay lifting the measures.
By accelerating the vaccination programme, making people get their second jabs, at the moment, you look, all the tests are talking about the 4 tests that we have are looking at the number of cases, but also hospitalisations, and those vaccinations can help us break that cycle of people having to go to hospital if they get COVID, and that's what's going to keep us on the roadmap.
Talk to our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, who's in Westminster. I mean, the problem here, Tamara, seems to be pretty clearly that the infection rates appear to be rising exponentially at the moment.
That's right, Stephen. You've got really competing pressures. The government message is we're going to wait a couple of weeks and look at the data, and a bigger push on vaccination. They've announced a new target now for all over 50s to have their second jab by the 21st of June. That could help us to have the opening up they want to do on June the 21st. But the problem, and the reason that scientists are warning we could already be in the early stages of a third wave and need to be very alert, is because although the death rates are very, very low, we are looking at a rise in cases from under 2,000 a day at the start of May to 3,400 yesterday and rising. And if that is allowed to get out of control, while the NHS is also dealing with the backlog of other procedures, they say things could get very worrying again, even though we've got the vaccine shield, if you like, this time, which we didn't have during the second and third lockdown. So scientists are going public now to say the government should really consider a delay.
OK, Tamara, thank you. Now, Japan is beginning vaccinating athletes ahead of next month's Olympics. That's despite the continuing protests around the country calling for the Games to be cancelled because of the COVID outbreak. Let's talk to our Asia correspondent, Tom Cheshire. I mean, really, is there a lot of public concern, Tom?
Yeah, a huge amount of public concern. Just over a month and a half to the Games, and 63% of the Japanese public, according to one poll, don't want it to happen. They're in the midst of a second wave. Cases are coming down, but Tokyo remains under a state of emergency. That's due to lift on June the 20th. But the idea of 90,000 people estimated to come over, journalists, athletes, all sorts of sponsors, other staff, they see that as potentially triggering a third wave, and they don't want it to happen. And Japan has other factors against it. It's not vaccinating very many people. Its regulators have been very cautious in approving vaccines, and only 12 million doses out of a population of around 126 million have been given so far. Now, despite all those concerns, the International Olympic Committee has said the Games will happen, they can't be postponed again, and barring Armageddon, they will take place. And the Japanese government has announced measures. It's already banned foreign spectators from coming to Japan for the Games, and is talking about reducing the number of spectators in the stadium and perhaps preventing them from cheering or giving high fives. So far, though, that is not doing much to reassure a very sceptical Japanese public.
OK, Tom, thank you. Well, let's talk to Dr. Nicholas Rennick, GP and vaccination doctor at a medical centre in Tokyo. Good to see you this morning. Are you concerned?
Thank you very much for having me. Yes, certainly. I think the summary that we've had so far is an excellent summary of the situation on the ground at the moment. Most Japanese people are feeling that this is just not the right time to be having a large international event with an ongoing state of emergency in Tokyo, and with case numbers starting to decline from the recent peak, but certainly still much higher than comfortable. And the issue, of course, is that our population here still remains largely unprotected. So in Tokyo, for example, only around 15% of the population over 65 have even had their first shot, and less than 1% have had a second shot. Vaccinations for those with high-risk medical conditions have not yet started at all, let alone vaccinations for the general population. And of course, we're keeping in mind that it generally is a 5-week process for these vaccinations, from the time you start the vaccination to having full immunity, 1 shot, and then 3 weeks later, a second shot with Pfizer, and then 2 weeks to build the full immunity. So June 18th would be the final day that you would need to start vaccination to be fully vaccinated. So although the government has, made some promises that the elderly would all be vaccinated by the end of July, for example, I think many of us are starting to feel that when the games start, inevitably, a lot of high-risk patients are still going to be unprotected, which is a situation that many in Japan feel very uncomfortable with, including a lot of medical personnel.
I mean, in terms of the restrictions that are being put in place for the Olympics, and obviously foreign spectators not allowed in, and presumably everyone heading in is going to have to be either vaccinated or tested. Does that give you any degree of confidence that these tens of thousands of incomers are not going to bring in new cases or new variants?
So absolutely, it is a Herculean task to try and keep so many tens of thousands of people in this Olympic bubble, as they're calling it, which we've seen with some of the smaller sporting events around the world. I think the government has published playbooks, basically, to sort of state the kind of code of behaviour it expects for all people involved, including the athletes. So this includes things like wearing face masks at all times, not visiting local restaurants, bars, etc. And basically, it's just, you're there to compete, you train, you play, and then afterwards you go to your hotel and read a nice book, I suppose, but trying to get people to avoid doing the mingling and things. I guess the big question, of course, is, how well is this kind of advice going to be followed? Certainly, I don't think the government is in a position to minutely police the actions of so many tens of thousands of people, and it really will, to a large degree, rely on the individual choices made by the people coming to Japan.
Look, what about the vaccination programme in general? I mean, I think I'm right in saying that once that they open up to the vaccinations to people under 65, it's going to be everyone eligible, and municipalities are going to have to decide how to process that themselves. I mean, that sounds a little bit chaotic. I mean, it may not be, but it sounds like it could be.
It certainly is going to be a big task, and we haven't had a lot of specifics about how that program is going to be managed. In terms of the priority schedule, so we're largely getting through the medical personnel at the moment, including myself. And then the second stage is the elderly vaccinations. And then the third stage is going to be those with high risk conditions. Managing that is going to be quite a challenge, not the least because unlike many other countries, Japan doesn't have very much information on a national level of who has what kind of medical conditions. So they're basically relying on questionnaire forms to try and basically say, look, if you have any medical conditions that you're at risk, then just self-declare and turn up on the vaccination centre. Obviously, that's quite a difficult process. And there's still some complications in there about making sure that the people who truly are at the highest risk are going to get the first priority.
Look, Dr. Rennick, really good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, let's turn our attention to Dr. Brian McCluskey, who's former Director of Global Health at Public Health England and someone who played a lead role in planning for the London Olympics. Good to see you this morning. I mean, look, you understand at least some of the pressures facing Tokyo and their Olympic Committee at the moment. Would you be more cautious, though, perhaps?
Good morning. No, I mean, I think you have to, I can understand why people are concerned, but you have to see that in the context of all the work that has gone in the last year to protect the Games and to protect the population of Japan. And essentially, there will actually be very little contact between the international visitors coming in and the local population. The athletes will go to the village, they'll travel to their venues and back again in their own transport. They won't use public transport. So there will be a huge separation. And then alongside that, there's a huge testing program. So athletes will be tested every day they're there. They'll be tested twice before they leave their home country. They'll be tested when they arrive at the airport. They'll be tested when they get to the village, and they'll be tested every day after that. So there's huge safety measures going in place.
I just wonder if, there will be people watching who think, well, why risk it? It's a sporting event. Why risk it? We know it's an important one, but nevertheless.
I think, from the athlete's point of view, people have been training, for 7, 8, 9 years to get here, and it'd be hugely disappointing for them to cancel it. But also, actually, the world needs to see that there is an end to this pandemic. It's not there yet, but it is in sight. And holding the Games safely is one way of showing that we know how to beat this virus, and the world will be a better place soon. And I think that's very important for people.
Yeah, and absolutely an important message. But it's very difficult when we look at the realities. Even here with the the cases rising exponentially, according to the experts, and some saying we're already at the start of a third wave. From your position when you're at Health England, that's got to cause real alarm bells here in the UK, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think we do need to be very cautious still. And, as we said, we need to stick to the data. So over the next 2 weeks, we need to look very carefully at how the numbers are going. We are seeing a rise in cases, but we're not yet seeing a rise in hospitalizations. We're not seeing a rise in deaths. And that could be the sign that the vaccine is having the effect that we want it to have. And that will allow us to move forward later in June. But we will have to be cautious and look at that data very carefully.
In terms of, I know this is just your approach, but you've obviously held some very serious office within the health industry here. Would you be more confident if we said, look, let's put it back 2-3 weeks?
Well, we've got to think, we're looking currently at the Indian variant, but the likelihood is that even when that's gone away, there'll be another variant. It'll be, another UK variant, a Russian variant, a French variant, a Vietnamese variant. We have to at some point say, we know how to manage this. The vaccines are more effective than we thought they were, and we need to move on and get into a better place. So at some point, we have to agree to move ahead with that. Otherwise, we'll just be delaying and delaying and delaying, and that's not good for anybody's psychological health, never mind the economy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But, I guess the argument would be, to at least get a higher proportion of younger people vaccinated. They're the people, the more you open up restrictions, they're more the people getting out and about, heading to restaurants, heading to nightclubs, all those sort of things. That I'm way past now, let me tell you. And it's about protecting them, isn't it?
Yes, and I think that's what we have to look very carefully at over the next couple of weeks. And it may be that when we get to the end of June, it's better to wait a week or two if there'll be significant improvement in the vaccination in that time. But if we're still seeing that there's no change in the hospitalisation, no change in the deaths, then I think it might be time to say, no, we've broken that chain. Now is the time when we can start to relax a bit and start to see ourselves getting back to normal.
I mean, can we, because of your position when you were head of global health, I mean, can we ever say we've broken the chain until there has been significant progress in the poorer parts of the world where the vaccines just aren't available and the logistics to deliver them aren't available at the moment?
And that's very true. And indeed, there's an argument which says the UK could do itself more good, if you like, by sharing its vaccine with the rest of the world. Because if we can reduce the rate of infection in India and South America, around Southeast Asia and other places, that will reduce the likelihood of more variants coming back to us. So it could be that giving vaccine to other countries does more good for us than carrying on a vaccination program here. And we need to think about sharing those vaccines around the world.
Dr. McCloskey, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Morning.
Well, still to come on Sky News Breakfast, I'm going to be finding out why those from black or Asian backgrounds are apparently struggling to break into the music industry's hierarchy.
Police have just made their first move and they've come in firing tear gas.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. There are hundreds of these turbines. There are thousands more across Gansu. That's what's left of the North Tunnel, where the North Koreans exploded 5 nuclear warheads. And this is a show of strength at a time when China is more fragile than it has been at any time in recent years. Shrapnel from that explosion, so you can see it littered along all the way. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. The train station and the airport, they're both closed. We're not sure about the roads. We've seen reports that they are being blocked by police, so we're going to try and find a way out of Wuhan. After 5 days stranded here, this is deliverance. We help you understand the world with us. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Beijing.
Hello, my name is Nadia Frontier.
My name is Ryan Matthews. I'm the Marine Assistant at Rotherham Research Station,
which is to the west of the West Antarctic Peninsula. So far I've been here for 5 months and it is an absolutely wonderful experience.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Yesterday turned out to be the hottest day of the year so far, and today temperatures will be a degree or two higher, with a headline of around 27 degrees Celsius for central southern England. Plenty of sunshine to come. A few showers potentially for the Western Isles, western parts of mainland Scotland, also for western parts of Ireland, and still some low cloud around northeastern coasts. So that translates to pollen in terms of a moderate count for much of England, Wales and Northern Ireland, but still a low count for Scotland.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Now, UK Music says new figures show people from black and Asian backgrounds really struggle to enter top positions in the industry. Just 6.4% of people who are black or black British have entered senior roles, according to the study. The results suggest the figure is even lower for Asian and Asian British professionals at just 4%. Well, the chair of UK Music's Diversity Task Force is Amo Talwar, and he joins us now. Good to see you. But what are we talking about when we talk about the higher echelons of the music industry?
So we're talking about quite senior executives within trade bodies, record labels, and publishing houses. And what we've realised and analysed in terms of this data is we've been really forensic around just unpacking what communities need, what support.
Okay, so what have you unfound there in terms of that unpacking and what these different communities need to get up in the industry? Is it them that needs more support or the industry that needs a shake-up?
I think it's a bit of both. I think for the first time we can actually really look at, say, for instance, the black or black British representation within the workforce and say, well, what are those reasons that at entry level those communities are quite high in terms of numbers, but they're just failing a little bit in terms of just getting to the top. And there's two reasons. One is historical systemic issues within the music industry, but two, there needs to be better support and recognition. Ultimately, if you look at all the global data, it makes fiscal sense to have diverse communities and different voices in your music industry.
I mean, in terms of, what people at home are going to think watching this, and if I dare speak for you on this, a lot of us are going to think, well, if we want to get into the music industry, if you want to get into the top echelons, how do you do it? Because people like me don't even know sort of what those jobs are or what they entail.
Yeah, I think it's about opening up opportunities, not just to just the whole of London, but the whole of the UK. And, access, talent is everywhere, access isn't. So I think what we've got to do as a sector is just open it up. We know there's work to be done. Our 10-point plan at UK Music addresses some of those inequalities. So I think we're definitely up for the challenge. And there's been some major changes since the last year. It's been a year. Today is the anniversary of Blackout Tuesday, and there's been some major inroads in terms of movements within not just the trade bodies, the record labels, and the music industry as a whole.
I mean, you'd sort of imagine, wouldn't you, that the music industry was, more open to this sort of things, an area that was, maybe at the forefront of things changing. Clearly, there seems to be quite a difference between what we see in terms of performers and the sort of artistic side of things and what we see in terms of management.
Yeah, there is. I mean, on stage, it's very diverse. And obviously, it makes sense because that's where people buy tickets and see artists. Behind the scenes, we've got a little bit of work to do, but we know that we as a UK economy ultimately are losing by not employing those diverse voices. So, it's that old political saying, we're all in it together, let's make some moves and let's be held accountable to those actions. I mean,
you're the boss of a record company, aren't you? Independently from your sort of your chair of the Diversity Task Force at UK Music. I mean, how difficult was it for you to aim that high and then get there?
Well, I was never supposed to work in the music industry. I actually studied engineering, so I don't know how I'm here, but I think it's about passion, it's about skills, it's about being resilient, and you get those things and some help from colleagues who have helped us on the way. So sometimes there's a bit of luck involved as well.
And in terms of Punch, your company, what difference does it make having an Asian British man at the helm of that? I mean, does it bring a different insight into how you view, potential deals, potential new artists, all that sort of thing?
I think having a diverse voice or an individual who sits right at the top, you have a position of difference. One, you're born British. 2, you have an Asian or a Black heritage. So you're a mixture of both communities, and you have skills and you have those nuances, and you can tap into other skills that come from those communities as well, because it's quite natural. So absolutely. And also for youngsters coming up to see themselves, those diverse voices, those diverse individuals at the most senior level, is quite inspirational for a young 18-year-old who's just studied music engineering to see their peer or potential person that looks like them. Yeah, so it does help.
Yeah, look, Emma, really good to talk to you this morning. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
OK, let's have a look at the weather for you this morning. Here's Joe.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello there. Another warm, sunny day in prospect for much of the country. We saw 25.1 degrees Celsius yesterday. Today, 27. Tomorrow we could see 28 or 29. But it's not all plain sailing. We have got a little bit of cloud and rain over western parts of Ireland. And certainly overnight tonight, we'll see some heavy thundery showers working their way up from the southwest, Devon, Cornwall, Wales, later on into the Midlands and northern parts of England.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Joe, thank you. Still to come, how worried should we be about a third wave? We'll speak to a scientist who says we should be concerned.
My name is Fatma Zilzila, the founder of Ecostar from Kuwait, where we face many environmental problems related to waste pollution, deforestation, and lack of information. We are collecting recyclables from houses, schools, and businesses in order to recycle them. In exchange of your recyclables, you get a tree.